Now,
on News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
Vince Coglianese.
Good afternoon to you. 3:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Angela Morabito joins us, former Department of Education press secretary under Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump. She'll talk to us about how student loan repayments are starting up again for the first time after 3 years. 3 years, a 3-year reprieve is coming to an end. And the Biden administration says people are struggling so much they shouldn't have to repay those loans right now. What does that tell you about the economy? Adam Brandon will be with us at 4:30. He's the president at Freedom Works. We'll get into this debate over spending bills. We've just got days before the government shuts down. What does that all mean? And then Congressman Matt Rosendale is here today as well at 5:30. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. And boy, we have a lot to get to today. We have an explanation from Bob Menendez as to why he had money flowing out of every pants pocket in every pair of pants he owned in his house, just envelopes stuffed with cash inside of his clothing, stitched into secret pockets. I'm not sure if they had secret pockets, but they were everywhere, this money. The feds say that he had something like $500,000 in cash just strewn about his home. Isn't that wild? And he says he's got a perfectly good explanation for this today. He delivered it in both English and Spanish so that everyone can understand why he keeps $500,000 in cash just laying all over his house. So we've got that coming up for you. But first, I want to get to this polling data today that everybody's chatting about. Tongues are wagging today on this issue, and the media and the left broadly are just in a all-out panic over the survey data that came back to this weekend from the Washington Post and ABC. And everybody is screaming, outlier, outlier, it's an outlier. This poll is not real. Even the Washington Post, in its own coverage this weekend of its own poll, says you probably can't believe our findings because they're probably not real. I'm not joking with you. This is a real line from this Washington Post ABC coverage. The poll shows that Donald Trump is up by 10 percentage points right now over Joe Biden. 10 percentage points over Joe Biden in a head-to-head matchup. It's the biggest lead we've seen in any of these surveys. And certainly your eyebrow pops when you hear this news. And the Washington Post writes in its coverage this weekend, quote, the Post-ABC poll shows Biden trailing Trump by 10 percentage points at this early stage in the election cycle. Although the sizable margin of Trump's lead in this survey is significantly at odds with other public polls that show the general election contest a virtual dead heat. The difference between this poll and others, as well as the unusual makeup of Trump's and Biden's coalitions in this survey, suggests it is probably an outlier. Let me put that differently. That's the Washington Post attacking itself. They instead of not publishing the survey, which they could have done, they could have said, look, we got bad data. There's no way this data is real. We're not going to publish this and treat it as a news item. This is phony. They could have done that. They didn't. They published the survey results, and then they said, don't believe them. What kind of report is this? Don't believe our survey results. Yep. The NBC poll is fast. Actually, there's two polls here. The ABC News Washington Post poll. That's where I want to concentrate first. I'm going to turn it over to ABC's George Snuffleupagus and let him take over this aspect of the report. He lays it out, brings a guest on, and they talk about the bad news that this is for Joe Biden.
To Washington now, and a new ABC News Washington Post poll which signals trouble for President Biden. It comes as the rest of the GOP field gets ready for their second debate. We have team coverage starting with Chief White House Correspondent Mary Bruce. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, George. Well, officials here are downplaying these latest numbers, but they certainly are cause for concern for Democrats. Look, President Biden is making the economic recovery the cornerstone of his reelection campaign, but our latest ABC News Washington Post...
What recovery? What recovery are they talking about? Even the media, the water carrying here for the claims of a recovery. If Americans are poorer now than they were before Joe Biden took office, how is that a recovery? In what world would you being poorer now than you were under the previous guy be considered a recovery? How did you recover?
Shows Americans overwhelmingly just aren't feeling it, that despite easing inflation and low unemployment, Americans really aren't buying into his positive Bidenomics message. Just 30% of Americans approve of his handling of the economy.
And this goes back to this claim. The media loves it. The Democrats love it. They're all working together to advance the interests of Democrats, that Americans are too stupid to detect how good the economy is right now. And we've had this conversation with E.J. Antoni a million times, and if you dig into the data, if you take a fingernail and you just scratch the surface of the data, boy, it is ugly what it shows underneath, right? What does the economy look like right now? People have lost thousands of dollars a year in real income, right? Because their money doesn't go as far. That's what I'm talking about by Americans being poorer. Everything's so much more expensive, obviously. Have you seen gas prices lately? Things are not good. Things are not good. Have you seen credit card debt? $1 trillion, over $1 trillion in credit card debt nationwide. It's bad. And people are not using that for luxury purchases. They're using it to make ends meet because over 60% of the country is living paycheck to paycheck right now. How is that a great economy? And then if you look at the jobs numbers, typically it's foreign-born workers who are making jobs gains. Natural-born Americans are not. They're losing in the job market. That's definitely happening. That's one of the things that they don't talk about in the press. Additionally, to the extent that jobs are being filled, people are taking multiple jobs. They're working multiple jobs just to make enough money to feed their families. So they're using people who take two jobs to pretend like there's a separate human being involved. There's not. There's deception in all of this reporting. And the media can tell you this, but they don't. They don't. This is why we have to turn to people who actually pay attention to the details, like E.J. Antoni, and they'll come on and share that with us. But again, you don't even have to dig into the details. As if you're just the average person who's looking at all this, looking at your bank account, looking at your expenses, you can do the math. You can balance a checkbook. And you don't need the Bureau of Labor Statistics to come along and tell you you're miserable. That Americans aren't waiting for a signal from the government. Just let me know. I'm ready to be miserable any moment. You just give me the word, government. No, you don't need the government to tell you that. You know it based on your household budget.
In fact, 44% of people say they are not as well off now as they were when Biden took office.
Of course.
But on another hot button issue, immigration, the numbers show only 23% of Americans approve of the president's handling of that situation. All of this is leading to a dismal approval rating for the president, now 19 points underwater. And when it comes to Biden himself, we know this. His age is a real political problem for him. Right now,
It's not his age. It's not his age. I mean, age is a shorthand way of talking about this. It's two things. It's his fundamental corruption, A, and B, it's his senility. Not everyone who's 80 years old is as senile as he is now. So age specifically is actually kind of a blunt instrument in terms of the way we talk about this. And also, don't allow the age thing to distract from the radicalism of these Democrats broadly. Do you think that if they replace Biden with another nominee out of central casting in the establishment Democrat Party, that they would have a fundamentally different approach to policy? No. Do you think Gavin Newsom is a fundamentally different person policy-wise than Joe Biden? No, he's not. He's worse. He's a California governor who's driven his state into the ground. Imagine what he would do if he had the federal government. It's not going to be better with Gavin Newsom. It'll be worse with Gavin Newsom. That's how crazy things are. So when they say it's kind of a way to usher him towards the door while not acknowledging all of the problems with his policies. The border's falling apart. The economy's in a shambles. Americans are being attacked by the federal government. The justice system is weighing down on them. The list, of course, goes on. Fentanyl. I can name a million things. The pullout from Afghanistan. It's disaster after disaster after disaster. So what they want to do very conveniently is show Joe Biden the door and say, this is not a referendum on Democrat Party policies. That's not what this is about. It's about his age. Look, he tripped on stairs. Look, he fell on stage. We've got to show him the door. Let's get him there. Let's put him in a wheelchair and roll him out. And then we're good. Problem solved. But no, that's not actually the case. They all want to avoid their own culpability in the destruction of this country. That's definitely what's happening. So don't allow the age thing to be a sole descriptor for why they're trying to get rid of Joe right now.
Quarters of Americans, 74%, say that he is too old to effectively serve a second term. And a majority of Democrats say someone else should actually be the nominee, though the party is deeply divided on who that someone else should be. And take a look at this when it comes to the head-to-head matchup with Donald Trump. Our poll is an outlier, and it does differ significantly from other recent polling. But our poll shows Trump with a 9-point lead over President Biden.
You're going to hear 9 and you're going to hear 10. I've seen, and I haven't resolved it completely, the difference between ABC News and Washington Post. It's the same poll that they're drawing the data from. I believe 10 points, the advantage is for registered voters. 9 points is for all adults in the survey. Registered voters, all adults is a bigger number, of course, than registered voters. I think that's why there's a discrepancy here. Either that or somebody got it wrong.
All 538's average polling still has Biden up by roughly 2 points. And get this, when we ask people if they think that Donald Trump should be constitutionally disqualified from serving another term, even those who said yes, that Trump shouldn't be allowed to run, 18% of them said that they would still vote for him. So, George, the bottom line here, this is just one poll. We are still a ways out from the election, but these numbers do show some real weaknesses for President Biden.
That's an unbelievable result. A bunch of people who said that Trump shouldn't even be allowed to run, they said, I'd still vote for him. That's unbelievable. What a survey. What a survey. What you're hearing this weekend, a lot of people are like, this is an outlier. This is an outlier. But I did actually go back and I pulled all of the ABC News, Washington Post polls over the course of the last year. I wanted to see what those numbers were. And interestingly, Trump is leading in all of them. Every single one. Let me go back. Last September, Trump leads by 2. This February, Trump leads by 3. This May, Trump leads by 6. Now, Trump leads by 10. So if you actually look at the trend line for the Washington Post ABC poll, you have seen a positive trend towards Trump. If you just map that out, it's not much of an outlier. It may not be plus 10, but it could be plus 8, plus 9. I mean, we're talking, this is, well within the statistical trend line here for how Trump is gaining support. Now, does it reflect reality? Who knows? It's a crapshoot. You know that. You know that. How many polls have you seen and then election day comes and you're like, it didn't square up, did it? But the panic is real. And the story, and I think that there's also a piece of this, which is, there are elements of the establishment left who love emphasizing this right now because they feel like they have no other choice. They're trying to figure out a way to show Joe Biden the door. They see him as a loser. This is not 2020. Now he's got a presidential record under his belt, and it's crap. All of the surveys show this. People are miserable about the current state of our country, and Joe Biden is right there and responsible for it, no matter what spin the White House tries to put out. So now you have Democrats who are pretty consciously, and we've seen, there was a Washington Post, it was David Ignatius like a week or two ago, saying it's time for Biden to go. It's time for Joe to go. Somebody else needs to step up. Somebody who doesn't have a record in the White House. So that's crazy, and could explain a lot of this. We've got some audio today from the women of The View trying to process this. Remember, this is an ABC News poll that we're talking about. ABC News, Washington Post, and The View airs on ABC. Listen to them as they try and talk about this. We'll start with Whoopi, who has no idea what's going on.
So, this is one of my favorite things, a new ABC Washington Post poll. That's tough to say. Washington Post poll.
Speaking English is tough for Whoopi.
Shows that Biden is trailing you-know-who by nearly 10 points. But...
You-know-who.
I know there are other polls that are also happening that are saying different things. What is going on out there?
So
that's an insightful question.
This ABC poll, I think,
Alyssa Farah Griffin.
I think may be a bit of an outlier. And I say that
what
we have.
You mean by explain what?
Basically, I'm with you where I'm skeptical of polls. They were wrong in 2016. They were wrong in the midterms in 2020. But you can take.
Well, the midterms weren't in 2020. I'm assuming she put a comma in there somewhere.
Information on aggregate when a lot of polls show the same thing over a period of time in different voters. One off that's so far out of step with other polling may mean there was an anomaly when they were taking the poll. Mm-hmm. I trust our pollsters at ABC. They're phenomenal.
Everyone's nodding at this point. Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And also, I think this may have just it may have overstated the lead. But let me be clear. Joe Biden has a big re-election problem, and Democrats need to wake up to it, whether they want to hear it or not. On aggregate, he has the highest approval rating since Jimmy Carter, who we all recall didn't go on to win re-election. He's lost massive support with black voters and Hispanic voters, places where you wouldn't think Donald Trump would do well, but he's doing significantly better than he did in 2020. He's doing, way better than he was in 2020, 42% with Hispanic voters, 20% with black voters. And one thing that's going on right now is this United Auto Workers strike. Joe Biden's going there this week, and so is Donald Trump. But
Biden only going, I think she's about to say, Biden only going because Trump decided to take the trip.
Donald Trump announced he was going first. And one area Democrats have been losing in the Trump era is working class voters. I think in many ways they're seen as maybe too elitist for people who don't have college educations. And Donald Trump picked up those voters. He announced he was showing up for them.
You hear the laughing? There are people at the table are laughing. They're literally the elitists that she's describing. They're like, they feel like Democrats are out of touch with the average person. Come on. Like they're like snorting into their arms that this is a thing. When of course it is a thing. It's been going on for years. And they still don't detect it, which is hilarious. It's good for us, actually, because it increases the likeliness that decency can win out. But here's the thing I want to share with you in just a moment. We've got to take a break for traffic. We're going to do that. But when we come back, the hostesses of The View begin insulting the employees at ABC who conducted the poll, and then they have to reel it back in. It's all sort of chaos, and it ends with Whoopi Goldberg super angry at everybody at the table. So don't miss it. It's ahead.
First thing each morning, O'Connor and Company with Larry O'Connor. Weekday mornings from 5 to 9 on WMAL.
All right, the women of The View, Looney Tunes as ever, but they're attacking their own pollsters, the ABC News pollsters. Let me pick up where I left off. This is now, I think, Sunny Hostin, Anna Navarro. This is where Anna Navarro attacks the pollsters.
Or anything like
Actually,
that. Go ahead.
I don't know that we're going to see those trial dates exactly like that, because I think he's going to ask for continuances, and there's going to be delays because of the presidential primary. I don't know what happened with this ABC poll. I don't know if the people asking the questions were high or the people answering the questions were high. But somebody has got to have been on some edibles or something else.
Oh, so there she is, attacking her own coworkers who did the survey. The producers got into the ears of the women and said, you have to issue a correction on this stat.
I think a lot of the problem, a lot of the messaging comes out of the news folks. You don't hear stuff that's going on. You don't hear. You hear
attacking her other colleagues in the news division.
It's dire straits. The election is next year. What year is this?
It's 2023.
Okay, thank you. I just like to check because sometimes I'm in a different time zone.
She's so dumb.
I have a legal note.
Can I?
Nobody at ABC that was conducting the poll was high.
Sunny Hostin.
I'm just doing what I'm told to do.
But can I say
Can you finish your thought?
So you finish.
I will finish my thought. Well, now you walked all over it, so I'm just gonna. That's all right. We're going to break. We'll be right back.
Oh man, Whoopi, poor Whoopi. She's completely lost as usual. She doesn't even know what year it is. Did you hear her? She said, "Is the election next year?" How old is Whoopi? Hey, seriously, how old is she? Whoopi Goldberg. Let's see. She's only 67 years old. Age not a factor there. That's not the problem. It's just her and her brain. Well, good afternoon to you. 3:36 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Adam Brandon, president of Freedom Works, joins us in the next hour at 4:30. We'll talk about the spending debate going on in Washington. Why can't they just cut some? Matt Rosendale will be with us, the congressman, at 5:30. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. For the first time in more than 3 years, the people who have borrowed federal student loans are going to have to start paying the bills again in October. We're just days away from that. The Biden administration is rushing to bring relief to people who have to pay back their loans. Kind of flies in the face of the economy is excellent message, doesn't it? The economy's great. Everyone's doing great. They just don't know it. And we have to save people from their student loans? What? I thought the economy was great. What are you trying to tell me here? Angela Morabito joins us now. She's a spokeswoman for the Defense of Freedom Institute and a former Department of Education press secretary under Betsy DeVos. Angela, good to have you with us again.
Great to be with you, Vince.
Why did it take so long for us to start paying our student loans again?
Quite simply, it's because the Biden administration was content to kick the can down the road on student debt. I was serving under Secretary DeVos when she first instated the freeze on student loans, and I can tell you it was meant to be temporary. It was in those early days of the pandemic where people didn't know what was going to happen next. It was only meant to be a temporary fix. And then Congress added on to that, and it kept extending the freeze. The Biden administration extended it several times. We all know that the national emergency is over, and yet they cling to this emergency policy because they are so desperate to remove the burden of student debt from the people who took out those loans and foist it onto people who didn't.
Right. And so now that everyone needs to start repaying those loans that have been paused for, again, over 3 years, the Biden administration has cooked up some ways to deal with your student loan repayment that doesn't include just simply repaying what you owe.
That's completely true. Back when the debt ceiling deal was signed earlier in the summer, President Biden agreed as a condition of the deal to restart student loan repayments in October. And he's doing that with a giant asterisk slapped on it without the consent of Congress. He's saying, sure, we'll send you your student loan bills. Sure, interest will start accruing. But by the way, if you do not pay your bills, potentially for another year, if you go another year and not pay your bills, you won't be in default. We won't ding you on your credit score, and we won't report you to the powers that be who could, cause problems there. So, yes, it's a return to repayment, quote unquote, but it's not what we bargained for.
But what that means is that the federal government will be defrauding the credit rating agencies. So all of us have a credit rating, and it's based on the likeliness that we are to fail to pay back a loan. And that's useful for a lender, of course, because they have to know how safe it is to give their money to someone. And rather than do an invasive background search into every aspect of your life, they rely on the credit rating agencies to give them a quick score of, hey, should I give this guy a low-interest loan? Should I give him a high-interest loan? What do I do here? If the federal government's going to conceal the status of these loans from the credit rating agencies, they're straight up defrauding them, aren't they?
Yeah, it would be a lie. The saying a half-truth is a whole lie. Well, if the Biden administration has decided it just doesn't need to tell the truth about whether or not people repay their student loan bills, yeah, I would call that lying. That is definitely untruthful. It robs the credit score of a lot of meaning that it would otherwise have as an instructive tool when it comes to other forms of lending.
Yeah.
And look, student loan freeze was not without cost. It costs us actually $5 billion per month to keep student loans on hold. So the idea that borrowers need another safety net or an on-ramp to repayment, as Biden calls it, after a 3.5-year holiday makes me sit back and think, well, where's the safety net for people who are already struggling under inflation and now don't want to have to pay off other people's loans?
Yes.
Where are the people, where is the help and the relief for people who are having student loans foisted onto them, even the many Americans who never went to college?
So when you say that it costs taxpayers nearly $559 billion over 10 years, that still comes out of us. I mean, when you say cost taxpayers, all these expenses mean that we get more inflation. The government's printing all this money to keep up with its obligations. In other words, we're getting hit hard by this decision to continue, up until this point, to continue allowing people to not pay their loans back that they took out, understanding that at some point they would need to repay them.
Right, and that $559 billion you mentioned is already on our tab. That is part of Biden's income-driven repayment plan, and that's the estimated cost to taxpayers over the next 10 years. He calls it the SAVE plan. I don't know what taxpayers are saving. I think we're paying through the nose for this, and all it is just another mechanism to shift the burden of student debt from the folks who took out those loans to taxpayers who didn't. So, I mean, it's all part of his strategy. His plan A was to get this bailout done through executive fiat, really, but the Supreme Court thankfully struck that down. His plan B was the changes to income-driven repayment, which are going forward. This is plan C to make it sure, hey, really have to repay your loans. And he's working on Plan D, which is using the federal rulemaking process to try to still enact more mass loan forgiveness.
It is so wild. And rather than, by the way, like if you wanted to get control of the cost of education, you would stop subsidizing these crappy colleges that cost so much. I mean, talk about inflation. The cost to go to college has outpaced inflation for as long as I've been alive. And the costs only keep going up because of the federal government's involvement. We should be out of the business of federal student loans for college. It's only making everything worse.
And what's so sadly ironic about that is that federal student aid was actually created to be a net benefit to taxpayers. It was supposed to lend money like a bank, but it doesn't have any fiduciary duty to the American taxpayer. That's why we have a $1.6 trillion money pit. So the solution here, we could do one of two things. You could have Congress get the Education Department out of the student loan business, because obviously it's not been very successful, or just require the student loan program to be managed with a fiduciary duty to the taxpayers who really fund it. Everything Biden's doing is destroying accountability that should exist between colleges and their students. When you're paying so much, you're taking out so much loan debt to go to college, that college owes you something in return. And a lot of colleges aren't holding up their end of the deal, and they're shielded from accountability because the federal government writes them a blank check.
How, on the politics of this, how scared do you think Democrats are right now that people who have to once again start paying off their loans, again, the ones that they signed on to, are going to hold it against them? They must be scared of the politics of this. This is obviously why going into the midterms, Joe Biden made big promises that he would forgive everybody's loans, including Harvard law graduates.
Yep, the timing of these announcements is not an accident. I do not believe it is an accident that the end of the quote-unquote on-ramp would hit right before the 2024 presidential election. I believe that the left has really kind of two things to look at. They have a set of pretty radical people, I would call them, who think they are entitled to have others pay off their loans. But they also have to deal with the vast majority of Americans who believe that if you have a debt, you pay off that debt, just like you would for a home loan or a car loan. You have an obligation to do it that your friends and neighbors aren't obligated to pay for you in your place. So this is tremendously unpopular politics on the whole. That's why it hasn't gone through Congress. Congress has the power of the purse. They could choose to forgive student debt, but they haven't because even those people realize it is bad policy and it's bad politics.
It's very bad politics because there are plenty of people around the country who have already either paid off their student loans, they're on the verge of completely paying them off after spending many years toiling to make that occur, or they never went to college in the first place and they shouldn't be obligated to pay off somebody else's student loans when they decided to do something different with their own lives.
Exactly. There are so many responsible folks out there who either went and got a degree that they knew they'd be able to pay back their debt. Maybe they chose to study something different. Maybe they chose to study in state instead of going somewhere pricier or to a private college. There are people who made really thoughtful and responsible choices to make sure they could fulfill the obligations that they committed to when they signed on the student loan. Those people don't get any help. The people who get the help are statistically very high earners. They've got college degrees. Many even have advanced degrees. And yet the folks at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale are being called upon to bail them out.
One other piece I would like to discuss, Angela, in your experience with education, to what extent is it possible to hold colleges and universities accountable for failing to teach anything useful to their graduates? I mean, we live in an era now where people will go to college for what seems like a 4-year cruise. They'll study some sort of esoteric concept that does nothing to do with ever turning over an income of any meaning. And then they get out, and then we're supposed to act like the schools are legitimate institutions of higher learning. At what point do we take it out of them? Do we go after their endowments? Do we treat these schools like they're nothing more than, like scams?
Well, Vince, I believe there's no greater force for accountability than the free market. And what we have in education right now is not a free market. You have the federal government that's intervened to such an extent that the market is completely skewed. These schools are not held accountable. So if somebody wants to go for 4 years of effectively summer camp, they have a right to do that. I don't think we're in the business of saying, no, you can't go study that thing. But we absolutely should say, no, we won't bail you out, or no, we won't subsidize it. I think that's the right answer. The federal government is the only lending institution I can think of that will send people a loan that will allow them to borrow money without really looking at, can you pay it back? If I went to the bank down the street and said, hi, I would like to go on a 4-year vacation. I have found a hedge fund with a football team. It's called a college. I want to go. They would be well within their rights to say, hey, lady, you're never going to pay that back.
Right.
No. The federal government doesn't do that. Somebody who's going to go be a doctor or an engineer, they have just a hard time getting a loan as somebody who wants to go study like feminist dance theory. It's absurd. We're not prioritizing the right things.
No, not at all. And we're ruining a lot of people. And okay, the final piece that I want to ask you about is I mentioned earlier that federal government's involvement in higher education drives up the cost of higher education, obviously, like so many other industries. But simultaneously, it gives the federal government incredible control over the way these universities operate, correct? And I mean, like, in terms of their culture, in terms of the things they have to, quote, teach, what kind of things they're not allowed to say. How much control does federal government money give the feds over these institutions of higher learning?
The answer to that really varies based on who is in the White House and who is running the Department of Education. I can speak from experience that Secretary DeVos was extremely concerned with academic freedom and thought the federal government had really no business telling what students what they cannot learn, or schools what they can and cannot teach. The only sort of caveat there is you shouldn't be teaching people something that is hateful or false, and that's why the Department of Ed has an Office for Civil Rights, which is charged with upholding civil rights law in education. Unfortunately, what we are seeing Team Biden do is really kind of weaponize that Office for Civil Rights. They are using it to pry into, well, what books are on school library shelves. Right. They're using it to try and enact a Title IX rule that would effectively allow men and women's sports. It would destroy women's spaces on college campuses. They are using that office to inflict an ideology, and yes, federal money is part of that. That's you're choosing to flex that muscle. Yep. But if you believe the government is best which governs least, you ought to believe that the Department of Ed doesn't really have a role in some massive federal top-down decision of what will be taught and what will be experienced on a college campus.
Right. This is why so-called universal pre-K brought to us by the federal government would be an awful idea. It would mean a distant, soulless bureaucrat will be raising your child out of your sight. You do not want that. I don't care what your politics are. Angela Morabito, thank you very, very much. As always, great to talk to you today.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you. Let me see. I've got some phone calls coming in. Chris is calling in from Thurmont, line 1. Chris, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
How you doing, Vince?
Good, sir.
I love this last segment because my daughter, who just recently graduated from Penn State, took a non-government student loan because the interest rate was lower than a government student loan, and she has been paying on it the whole time because she's not eligible for the bailout because it's not a government student loan. Well, her mother and I have been helping her pay it, but she gets no bailout, period. She still has to pay it off, period. And we are not people of means, trust me. I mean, but
you're people of honor.
For us,
you're people of honor. You made a promise, and now you're fulfilling it.
Yeah, an oath is an oath, period.
Yeah,
so,
I agree with you.
Yeah, and but there is no, and yet we're still footing the bill for some of these other people.
Isn't that amazing? So you didn't even take a federal student loan, and now you're supposed to pay other people's federal student loans off? That's the environment that Joe Biden has created.
That's the gist of what I'm getting. Yes, exactly. So,
Chris, thank you. I appreciate this. That's a good point. You know, a lot of people out there taking these private student loans, they don't have this option. They weren't delayed for 3 years from paying it back. And what are we teaching people? If you don't have to meet your obligations forever, is that really how it works? And it's another reminder of federal government handouts, by the way. So in the end, it'll cost you. And it's almost impossible to get Ronald Reagan had a quote on this. Doesn't come to mind as quickly as it might for Cal Thomas, but basically, what's the proof of eternal life is a federal government program, something like that. It'll never go away. It takes forever to reel it back. Oh, we're only going to let people be deadbeats on their loans for 3 years. After that, it'll go away. No, it won't. Then it's just fight after fight after fight after fight just to keep it in place, all at the expense of so many things that make America great. It's wild. It's 3:52 now. Your call's more in a moment. Well, let's take Richard calling in from Manassas now, line 4. Richard, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
The Biden administration is, again, trampling on the concept of moral hazard. They did it with the rents, where people didn't have to pay their rent.
Yep.
Now they're doing it with student loans. They're Soros prosecutors do it with criminals, smash and grab criminals. There's no penalty for bad decisions in a Biden administration. Yeah. That's what they're pushing out for everybody.
No question. And the general theme here, as you've rightly noted, is that no matter what you want to do, it's totally fine. It's all nihilism all the way down. It's like anything. It's everything so decadent with these people. Richard, thank you.
It's Cloward all day long.
Piven and Cloward. Yeah, great observation. Really appreciate that. All right, hang with me. Speaking of literally doing anything you want, talk about this senator who has cash falling out of his pockets. He now says he has an explanation for this. He's one of the most corrupt people on the planet. And we'll talk about his wild press conference today. You're not going to want to miss it.